July 30, 2007. The rhythmic echo of hammers and drills filled the musty air of the Garson family basement. Rick Donovan wiped sweat from his brow as he surveyed the dingy space. His renovation crew had already torn out the old wood paneling, revealing cracked concrete walls that hadn't seen daylight in decades. "Hey, Rick. Come look at this," called Marco, the youngest member of his crew. Rick followed Marco's voice to the far corner of the basement where they'd removed an old workbench. There sat a large white ice chest, its once pristine surface now yellowed with age. Thick bands of duct tape crisscrossed the container, reinforced with frayed rope that had been knotted multiple times. "What do you think?" Marco asked, crouching beside it. Rick's construction experience had taught him to recognize the difference between forgotten storage and deliberate concealment. This was definitely the latter. "Don't touch it," he said, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the police." Detective Sarah Reeves arrived within 30 minutes. At 43, she had the steady demeanor of someone who had seen it all in her 20 years with the Oak Ridge Police Department. But even she paused when she saw the sealed container. "How long has the house been vacant?" she asked, pulling on latex gloves. "About 5 years, according to the new owners," Rick replied. "They bought it at auction. The family that used to live here scattered to the winds years ago." Sarah nodded, carefully documenting the ice chest with her camera before gesturing to the forensics team to move forward. The technicians meticulously cut away the tape and rope, revealing a container that had been sealed for decades. The lid creaked open. The sickly sweet odor of decomposition had long since faded, leaving only the musty smell of time and decay. Inside, wrapped in a once cheerful floral sheet now faded to nearly colorless threads, lay the skeletal remains of a human being curled into a fetal position. A few strands of long hair still clung to the skull, which bore a visible fracture above where the right eye would have been. Sarah fought to maintain her professional composure. After all these years, she still felt a profound sadness when confronted with the stark reality of a life ended violently. She turned to her partner, Detective James Morales. "Get me everything on the Garson family," she said quietly. "And call the medical examiner. We need to know exactly how long these remains have been here." Back at the station, Sarah pinned what little they knew to the incident board. According to property records, the house had belonged to the Garson family from 1978 until 2002, when it was sold following Irene Garson's move to Idaho after her husband's death. The couple had 4 children, Leslie, Michael, Thomas, and Rebecca. "Got something," James said, walking in with a stack of files. Leslie Garson was reported missing in 1985. She was 19 at the time. Sarah flipped through the yellowed report. The original investigating officer had written little more than a few paragraphs. According to the statement from Irene Garson, Leslie had packed a small bag and left after an argument, saying she was going to California with a boyfriend whose name Irene didn't know. No follow-up, Sarah noted with disapproval. No interviews with friends, teachers, siblings. Just, teenager runs away and case closed. "Different time," James said, though his tone suggested he found it just as inexcusable. The preliminary forensics report arrived the next morning. The remains were female, approximately 18 to 20 years old at time of death, and had been in the chest for at least 20 years. The skull showed blunt force trauma consistent with a heavy object. More disturbingly, several ribs showed healed fractures of varying ages, evidence of repeated physical trauma long before death. Sarah stared at the photos. "She was abused," she said softly. "Probably for years. Dental records confirm it's Leslie Garson," James added. "I've tracked down the mother. She's living in an assisted care facility in Boise. Irene's 76 now, early stages of dementia according to the facility director, but she has mostly lucid days." "What about the siblings?" "Michael lives in Oregon, works as an accountant. Thomas is in Florida, some kind of sales job. Rebecca died in a car accident in '97. Sarah nodded. Let's visit the neighbors first, anyone who lived near the Garsons in the 80s. Then we'll talk to Irene. The old neighborhood had changed in 20 years. Houses had been repainted, yards redesigned, families moved in and out. But Sarah managed to find 3 households with residents who remembered the Garsons. Martha Wilkins, now in her 80s, had lived across the street since 1972. She invited the detectives in for coffee, her liver-spotted hands shaking slightly as she poured. Leslie was such a quiet thing, Martha recalled, settling into her armchair. Always looking after those younger ones. The mother wasn't much for parenting, if you ask me. Working odd shifts at the hospital laundry, sleeping half the day. And that father. Her voice trailed off, and Sarah noticed her grip tighten on her cup. What about him, Mrs. Wilkins? Douglas had a temper, Martha said after a pause. You'd hear him shouting at all hours. Once or twice, I saw Leslie outside at night, just sitting on the lawn crying. I asked if she needed help, but she always said everything was fine. That's what they all say, isn't it? Sarah nodded, making notes. Did you ever see any injuries on Leslie or the other children? Leslie had bruises sometimes. Said she was clumsy. Martha shook her head. I should have done more. Called someone. But back then, people minded their business about family matters. The next neighbor, Bob Garrison, had been a teenager himself when the Garsons lived next door. Now a middle-aged man with teenagers of his own, he seemed uncomfortable discussing the past. My parents told me to stay away from their house, he admitted. Mr. Garson gave everyone the creeps. Always watching the neighborhood kids, complaining if a ball landed in his yard. Did you ever interact with Leslie? James asked. Bob hesitated. Sometimes she'd be sitting on their back steps when I cut through the alley to school. A few times, she gave me cookies she'd baked. Said her siblings didn't appreciate them anyway. He paused. She always seemed sad. The last time I saw her, maybe a few weeks before she supposedly ran away, she asked me if I'd ever thought about just disappearing. Sarah's interest sharpened. What did you say? I was 15, detective. I thought she meant like running away to join a band or something. I said sure, sometimes. His face showed regret. If I'd known. At the third house, an elderly man named Frank Torres told them he'd often seen Douglas Garson coming home late, stumbling drunk up the driveway. One night, Frank said, lowering his voice though there was no one else to hear, I saw him dragging Leslie by her hair from the car into the house. She was maybe 17 then. I almost intervened, but, my wife was pregnant, and Garson had a gun. He'd shown it off at the block party, talking about how he'd shoot any intruders. Frank looked away. The next day, Leslie was out getting the mail with sunglasses on. Middle of winter. Sarah's notepad filled with similar stories, small observations that, taken together, painted a picture of a household ruled by fear and abuse, centered around Douglas Garson. The trip to Boise revealed little more. Irene Garson sat in a sunny common room at Golden Pines Assisted Living, her thin hands folded in her lap, a vacant smile on her face. She remembered Leslie, she said, such a headstrong girl. Always fighting with her father. She left to go to California, Irene said, her voice surprisingly firm. With a boyfriend. An artist or musician, I think. Mrs. Garson, Sarah said gently, we found Leslie's remains in your former house in Oak Ridge. She never made it to California. Irene's smile didn't falter, but her hands began to tremble. No, that's not right. She left. Douglas said she left. Did you see her leave, Mrs. Garson? James asked. I was at work, Irene said, her gaze sliding toward the window. Night shift. Douglas told me when I got home. Said she'd packed a bag and stormed out after they argued. What did they argue about? Irene shook her head. Douglas didn't say. Just that she was ungrateful, disrespectful. The usual. Further questioning yielded nothing substantial. Either Irene truly didn't know what had happened to her daughter, or she had built a protective wall of denial over the decades. Back in Oak Ridge, Sarah dug into hospital records and found what she feared: 3 separate emergency room visits for Leslie between 1983 and 1984. A broken wrist from falling downstairs. A dislocated shoulder from a bicycle accident. 2 cracked ribs from falling against a counter. Classic patterns, the department psychologist confirmed when Sarah consulted him. The victim makes excuses, the medical staff notes suspicions, but the patient denies abuse, and eventually they stop seeking help altogether. The investigation hit a wall until an unmarked envelope arrived at the sheriff's office, addressed simply to Leslie Garson Investigation. Inside was a photograph from 1985, showing a young woman with straight brown hair standing in a kitchen, smiling tensely at the camera. Behind her, partially visible in the background, was a white ice chest identical to the one found in the basement. Written on the back in shaky handwriting, "She never left." The postmark was from Riverdale, a town just 20 miles away. "Someone knows something," Sarah said, staring at the photo. Someone who was too afraid to come forward then, and is still afraid now. When the photo was released to the media, calls flooded the tip line. Former classmates, teachers, even a distant cousin of the Garsons. Most had nothing substantial to offer, but a woman named Cynthia Parks changed everything. "I was Leslie's best friend in high school," she told Sarah, sitting nervously in the interview room. "We lost touch after graduation. She wasn't allowed to go to college even though she got a scholarship. Her father said women only needed to learn housekeeping." "Did she ever talk about abuse at home?" Sarah asked. "Not directly. But I saw things. A burn mark on her arm once, perfectly round, like a cigarette. She said she accidentally touched the stove. Cynthia twisted her wedding ring. The worst was right before she disappeared. She called me, terrified. Said her dad had found her diary where she'd written about wanting to move away, maybe go to California someday. He beat her so badly she could barely walk the next day at school." "Did she mention any specific threats he made?" "Yes," Cynthia whispered. "She said he told her if she ever tried to leave, he'd put her somewhere cold and dark where no one would find her." Tears filled Cynthia's eyes. "I begged her to tell someone, to get help. She said no one would believe her over her father. He was respected at church, had friends on the police force." That detail sent Sarah back to the original missing persons report. The investigating officer had been Gerald Collins, now retired. When Sarah tracked him down, living just outside Oak Ridge, his reaction was defensive. Doug Garson was a good man, Collins insisted, standing on his porch, refusing to invite Sarah inside. Sure, he drank a bit, but who didn't back then? He kept his family fed and his lawn mowed. If his daughter ran off, it wasn't his fault. "Did you investigate at all?" Sarah asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "Interview her friends? Check bus stations?" Collins's face hardened. "I knew Doug from the Elks Lodge. When he said she ran off with some boy, I believed him. End of story." But it wasn't the end. The forensics team made another discovery while thoroughly examining the basement: a loose tile near the old furnace. Hidden underneath were 5 small notebooks, water-damaged but partially readable. Leslie's diaries, dating from 1982 to 1985. The entries started innocuously enough: school crushes, frustrations with siblings, dreams of becoming a teacher someday. But by 1983, a darker tone emerged. "Dad threw a plate at Mom tonight. Michael tried to stop him and got slapped so hard he fell. I hate living like this. Dad says I'm getting too friendly with Jason from church. Says I'm a slut like all teenage girls. I've never even kissed anyone." By 1985, the entries became increasingly desperate. "Dad searched my room again. Found the college brochures. He tore them up and said girls who leave home end up as whores. Said I'm not going anywhere until I'm married to someone he approves of. The final entry, dated July 17, 1985. He found my savings. The money I've been hiding to get a bus ticket. He was waiting in my room when I got home from work. Said I was ungrateful after everything he's done for me. He said if I tell anyone what goes on in this house, I'll end up colder than winter. I believe him now. I have to find another way out. Leslie vanished 3 days later. Douglas Garson told his wife, his other children, and the police that she had run away. No one questioned it. No one looked further. Sarah brought Michael and Thomas Garson in for questioning. Both were now middle-aged men with families of their own. Michael, the older of the two, seemed genuinely shocked by the discovery of his sister's remains. I always thought she'd made it to California, he said, his voice hollow. That maybe she'd found a better life and just didn't want to remember us. Did you witness your father abusing Leslie? Sarah asked directly. Michael stared at his hands. He was hard on all of us, but especially her. She fought back more, I guess. Stood up to him. Tried to protect us younger kids. The night she disappeared, what do you remember? Dad told us she'd run away while we were at our grandma's for the weekend. Mom was working. When we came home Sunday night, Leslie was just gone. Her room was cleaned out. Dad said good riddance. Thomas Garson's interview was briefer. He claimed to remember little about his childhood, about Leslie, about anything before he left home at 18. His body language screamed discomfort, his eyes never meeting Sarah's. Were you afraid of your father? Sarah asked him. A muscle twitched in Thomas's jaw. Everyone was afraid of my father. Did he kill Leslie? Thomas stood abruptly. I don't know anything about that. I was 12 when she disappeared. If we're done here, I need to catch my flight back to Florida. But Thomas didn't fly back to Florida. Instead, police surveillance watched him drive to Riverdale, to a small house on the outskirts of town. The home of Ann Whitman, formerly Ann Garson, Douglas's sister. When Sarah and James knocked on Ann's door the next morning, both Thomas and Ann were waiting for them, sitting stiffly at a kitchen table. I sent the photograph, and said without preamble. I took it at a family dinner the weekend before Leslie disappeared. Douglas insisted on taking a family photo, which wasn't like him. Now I understand why. He wanted evidence she'd been there, happy and normal, right before she ran away. Why didn't you come forward before? Sarah asked. Ann's hands trembled as she lifted her coffee cup. Douglas threatened me. Said if I ever questioned Leslie's running away, I'd regret it. After they found her, I couldn't stay silent anymore, but I was still too afraid to come forward openly. I knew, Thomas said suddenly, his voice barely audible. Not everything, but enough. I woke up that night, the night Leslie disappeared. Heard shouting, a thump. Then silence. The next morning, Dad was cleaning the kitchen floor with bleach at 5 a.m. He never cleaned anything. Why didn't you tell anyone? James asked. I was 12, Thomas repeated, but this time his voice cracked. And he was my father. By the time I was old enough to understand, to really piece it together, he was dead. What good would it have done? The case against Douglas Garson built steadily over the following weeks. Former neighbors came forward with additional stories of violence and threats. The medical examiner confirmed the blunt force trauma to Leslie's skull matched the dimensions of a particular hammer model, the same type found in old photographs of Douglas's workbench. Most damning of all was a statement from Irene Garson, recorded on a day when her mind was unusually clear. She described coming home from her night shift to find Douglas cleaning bloodstains from the kitchen. When she asked about Leslie, he told her their daughter had run away while she was at work. When she questioned this, he threatened her and the other children. I knew, Irene admitted, tears running down her wrinkled face. Deep down, I always knew. But I had 3 other children to protect. Douglas said he'd kill us all if I ever told anyone. After he died, it was easier to keep believing the lie than face what I'd let happen. But despite the overwhelming evidence, no charges could ever be filed. Douglas Garson had died of a heart attack in 1993, taking his guilt to the grave. Leslie Garson was laid to rest in the Oak Ridge Cemetery on a crisp autumn day in 2007, 22 years after her death. Most of the town turned out for the service, many bearing silent guilt for having looked the other way for so long. Sarah stood at the back of the crowd, watching as Michael placed flowers on his sister's casket. Thomas had not returned for the funeral, and sat alone on a folding chair, her face hidden behind large sunglasses. "You gave her justice," James said, standing beside Sarah. "That's something." Sarah wasn't so sure. Justice would have been Leslie living out her dreams, going to college, becoming a teacher, growing old. Justice would have been someone believing her, helping her, saving her before it was too late. The renovated Garson house went on the market in 2009, freshly painted in cheerful colors with new appliances and refinished hardwood floors. Despite the competitive price and desirable neighborhood, it sat empty for 5 years before finally selling at a significant loss. The new owners lasted less than a year. They never specified why they left, citing only personal reasons when they put the house back on the market. But locals whispered about the basement that never seemed to warm up, no matter how high the thermostat was set. About the cold spots that moved around the house, following you from room to room. About the faint sound of crying that sometimes drifted through the vents on quiet nights. Sarah visited the house one last time before moving to a new position in the State Bureau of Investigation. The newest owners had abandoned it just 3 months after moving in, leaving some furniture behind in their haste to escape. Standing in the empty kitchen, Sarah thought about Leslie, about the life she should have had, about the help that never came. About a system that had failed her so completely that her own murder had gone unnoticed and uninvestigated for over 2 decades. "I'm sorry we were too late," she said softly to the empty house. As she turned to leave, a cold breeze brushed past her face, despite all the windows being closed and the summer heat outside. For a brief moment, Sarah could have sworn she heard a young woman's voice whisper, "Someone finally heard me." But when she turned back, there was only silence and the lingering chill of secrets long buried.